Dr. Zara Novak pressed her forehead against the observation deck's reinforced transparisteel and watched the planet below pulse with bioluminescent patterns that had no business being that beautiful. After 8 months of isolation aboard Meridian 7, she developed the unfortunate habit of talking to celestial bodies as if they were old friends, which probably indicated either advanced loneliness or the early stages of space madness. Possibly both. "You know," she said to the swirling aurora-like patterns that danced across the planet's atmosphere, "if you're trying to communicate, you could at least use a frequency I can decode without giving myself a migraine. I've got enough problems without adding mysterious alien mathematics to my daily stress routine." The planet, predictably, didn't respond with anything resembling standard communication protocol, but the electromagnetic readings on her scanner shifted in what almost looked like a deliberate pattern. Zara had been a communications specialist for 12 years, long enough to recognize the difference between random cosmic background radiation and something that might actually be intentional, but not long enough to maintain professional skepticism when she was the only conscious human in a 50 light-year radius. Her comm unit crackled to life with the sound that had become the highlight of her day. Kai Thorne's morning check-in from Section C, transmitted through the station's barely functional internal network. The radiation barriers that separated their sections had turned their survival situation into the universe's most elaborate long-distance relationship, assuming you could call two scientists trying not to die alone in space a relationship. "Morning, Zara," Kai's voice carried the particular brand of forced cheerfulness that had become their shared defense against existential dread. "Still talking to the planet, or have you moved on to having philosophical discussions with the air recyclers?" "The air recyclers are terrible conversationalists," Zara replied, settling into the observation deck's single-functioning chair. "They just wheeze dramatically and occasionally emit concerning mechanical sounds. The planet, on the other hand, appears to be developing opinions about my research methodology." "Opinions?" "The electromagnetic patterns shift every time I adjust my scanning parameters. It's either responding to my equipment or it's the universe's way of telling me that my doctoral thesis was fundamentally flawed." Kai's laugh carried through the static, and Zara found herself smiling for the first time in days. His voice had become her anchor to sanity, a reminder that somewhere in this broken station was another human being who understood the peculiar mixture of boredom and terror that defined their daily existence. "Speaking of fundamentally flawed," Kai said, "my life support systems are having what could generously be described as a philosophical disagreement with the concept of maintaining breathable atmosphere. The oxygen recycler keeps shutting down, and I'm running out of creative ways to convince it that keeping me alive is in everyone's best interest." Zara's smile faded as she pulled up the station's system diagnostics. The readings from Section C were worse than Kai's casual tone suggested, which meant he was either in denial about the severity of his situation or he was deliberately downplaying it to avoid worrying her. Given that they'd spent 8 months learning each other's communication patterns, she suspected the latter. "How bad is it really?" she asked, switching to what they'd come to call their actual survival talk tone, which was significantly less optimistic than their usual banter. "Bad enough that I've started naming the various mechanical failures," Kai admitted. "There's Wheezy, who controls the air mixture, Sparky, who handles power distribution, and Gerald, who seems to exist solely to make ominous clicking sounds at 3-hour intervals. Gerald's probably fine, but Wheezy and Sparky are definitely plotting against me." Kai. "Right, sorry. Professional assessment, I've got maybe 4 days before the oxygen recycling fails completely, and the backup systems aren't responding to manual override. I've tried everything short of percussive maintenance, and frankly, hitting expensive life support equipment with wrenches seems like the kind of decision I should probably run past someone with more advanced degrees than me." Zara was already pulling up the station schematics, her mind automatically shifting into problem-solving mode. Meridian 7 had been designed as a research platform, not a survival scenario, and 8 months of jury-rigged repairs had pushed every system beyond its intended operational parameters. The fact that they'd survived this long was either a testament to human ingenuity or cosmic luck, and she suspected their luck was running out. "I might be able to reach you," she said, studying the radiation readings between their sections. The solar storm damaged the containment fields, but there's a path through sections D and E that shows marginally survivable exposure levels. Marginally survivable? Kai's voice carried a note of concern that made her realize how that had sounded. Define marginally, he continued. Are we talking mild radiation poisoning marginally or spontaneous cellular breakdown marginally? Because my tolerance for adventure has really declined since being stranded in space. Zara ran the calculations again, hoping the numbers would improve through sheer force of will. They didn't. The radiation levels in the connecting sections were high enough to cause serious damage, but not immediately fatal with proper shielding. The problem was that proper shielding was a relative term when your radiation suit had been jury-rigged from spare parts and optimistic thinking. It's doable, she said finally. Risky, but doable. I'd need to modify my radiation suit and bring portable life support equipment, but I could make it to your section. And then what? We'd both be stuck in Section C with failing life support systems. That's not a solution, that's just a more efficient way to die together. Together's better than alone, Zara said, and immediately regretted how that sounded. Their conversations had been growing more personal over the months, but she hadn't meant to voice that particular truth quite so directly. The silence stretched long enough for her to wonder if the comm system had finally given up entirely, but then Kai's voice came through with a warmth that made her chest tighten. Yeah, he said quietly. It really is. The planet below pulsed with a particularly bright sequence of lights, and Zara's scanners registered electromagnetic patterns that looked almost like musical notation. She'd been tracking similar responses for weeks, subtle changes in the planet's energy output that seemed to correlate with their conversations. It was probably coincidence. The alternative suggested a level of awareness that would rewrite humanity's understanding of planetary consciousness, but the timing was consistently suspicious. Kai, she said, watching the readings dance across her screen, I think our mysterious neighbor is eavesdropping on us. The planet? The electromagnetic patterns shift every time we talk. And not randomly, they're responding to specific conversation topics. Emotional content seems to trigger the strongest responses. So you're telling me that we're providing entertainment for a celestial body that may or may not be sentient? That's either fascinating or deeply embarrassing, depending on how you look at it. Both, Zara said, noting another spike in the readings. Definitely both. She stood and began pacing the small observation deck, her mind racing through possibilities. If the planet was actually responding to their communications, it suggested intelligence on a scale she couldn't comprehend. More importantly, it might mean they weren't as alone as they'd assumed. I'm going to try something, she announced, activating her equipment's full scanning array. If you're right about this being our last chance to combine resources, and if our planetary audience is actually paying attention, maybe we can get some help with the navigation. Help from a planet? Help from something that's been watching us for 8 months and seems interested in keeping us alive, Zara corrected. The radiation levels between sections have been fluctuating, but not randomly. They decrease when one of us is in distress and increase during our more optimistic conversations. Either this planet has the universe's most sophisticated weather patterns, or it's been trying to facilitate our survival. The comm crackled with static, and for a moment she thought she'd lost the connection. Then Kai's voice came through, carrying a note of hope she hadn't heard in weeks. Zara, if you're going to try to reach me, he said, if you think there's a chance this could work, finally alone up here for 8 months, and maybe we don't have to be anymore. Do it now. I trust you completely. Zara looked out at the planet's swirling lights, then at her radiation suit hanging in the equipment locker, then at the readings showing marginally survivable passage through the damaged sections. The smart choice was to wait for rescue that might never come. The human choice was to risk everything for the possibility of not dying alone. Give me 2 hours to prep the equipment, she said, already moving toward her radiation gear. And Kai? Start thinking of better names for your life support systems. If I'm risking cellular breakdown to reach you, the least you can do is introduce me properly to Wheezy and Sparky. His laughter followed her to the equipment locker, and for the first time in months, Zara felt something other than resignation about their situation. Outside the station, the planet pulsed with approving light. The journey through Section D began with Zara's radiation suit immediately developing what could charitably be described as performance anxiety. The modified shielding she'd cobbled together from spare sensor arrays and emergency blankets was holding, but the suit's diagnostic systems were flashing warnings that would have been concerning even if she weren't already walking through an irradiated maze of twisted metal and exposed conduits. Suit status report, Kai's voice crackled through her helmet comm, providing a welcome distraction from the Geiger counter's increasingly agitated clicking. Well, the good news is that I'm not immediately dying, Zara replied, carefully navigating around a section of corridor where the walls had been peeled back like a metal flower. The bad news is that my suit thinks I am, and it won't stop telling me about it. I've got 17 different warning indicators flashing, and I'm pretty sure 3 of them are just expressing general disapproval of my life choices. Which 3? Warning lights labeled, questionable judgment, poor risk assessment, and my personal favorite, operator error, consult manual. Apparently, my radiation suit came with a passive-aggressive personality module. Kai's laughter helped mask the more concerning sounds coming from her suit's air recycling system. The journey to Section C was supposed to take 90 minutes according to her calculations, but those calculations had assumed functional corridor lighting and the absence of debris fields that required creative interpretation of the word passable. Navigation update, she announced, climbing through what had once been a maintenance access but was now serving as the universe's most expensive jungle gym. I'm currently in what the schematics optimistically call a service corridor, but which appears to be where the station stores its collection of twisted metal sculptures and broken dreams. Any sign of our planetary friend's assistance? Zara checked her external readings and felt a surge of hope mixed with scientific curiosity. Actually, yes. The ambient radiation levels are lower than my projections suggested they should be. It's subtle, but consistent, like something is actively dampening the radiation output in areas where I'm walking. Something or someone. Given that we're orbiting a planet that seems to respond to our emotional states, I'm willing to suspend disbelief on the someone hypothesis. Though I should point out that if our host is manipulating electromagnetic fields to help me reach you, it suggests technology that makes our best efforts look like children playing with rocks. She paused to catch her breath and check her suit's power levels, which were declining faster than optimal but still within acceptable parameters for completing the journey. Through a gap in the station's hull, she could see the planet below, its bioluminescent patterns shifting in complex spirals that almost looked like encouragement. Kai, are you monitoring the planetary electromagnetic output from your end? I've got limited sensor access, but yeah. Why? The patterns are becoming more complex as I get closer to you. If I didn't know better, I'd say it's excited about something. Maybe it's been waiting 8 months for us to finally meet face-to-face, Kai suggested. Interplanetary matchmaking could be the next big thing in xenobiology. Tired of dying alone in space? Try Cosmic Harmony dating services, now with full electromagnetic compatibility screening. That's either the worst pickup line in the galaxy or the beginning of an entirely new field of scientific study, Zara said, squeezing through a gap that definitely hadn't been in the original station blueprints. Possibly both. Her suit's navigation system chose that moment to have what could only be described as an existential crisis, its display cycling through error messages in 3 different languages before settling on a helpful icon of a confused-looking astronaut shrugging apologetically. The corridor ahead split into 3 directions, none of which appeared on her schematics. Navigation challenge, she announced. My suit's GPS has apparently decided that I don't exist, and I'm facing a choice between 3 equally unappealing passages. Any suggestions from the peanut gallery? Middle passage, Kai said without hesitation. It's the most direct route according to the original blueprints, assuming the station hasn't rearranged itself too dramatically since the storm. Confidence level? About 60%. Which is the best I can offer given that I'm basing this on 8-month-old schematics and what I remember from the station tour we got before everything went to hell. 60% beats my current navigation confidence of, hope for the best and try not to walk into any more radiation hot spots, Zara said, heading toward the middle corridor. Though I should mention that this passage appears to be decorated with what I can only describe as, ominous warning signs and, dramatic emergency lighting. Define ominous. Well, there's a sign that says, danger, unstable structure, in 5 languages, including one that I'm pretty sure is just pictographs of people running away. Below that is another sign reading, authorized personnel only, which raises the philosophical question of whether anyone can be considered authorized when the entire chain of command has been reduced to 2 people having this conversation. I hereby authorize you to ignore safety regulations in the interest of not dying alone, Kai said solemnly. Consider this your official permission to engage in questionable structural engineering and creative interpretation of safety protocols. Permission granted and immediately exercised, Zara replied, stepping over a section of flooring that had definitely seen better days. Though I should point out that if this goes badly, you'll be the only witness to my spectacularly poor decision-making, which seems unfair to your mental health. The corridor ahead opened into what had once been Section E's main junction, now transformed into an abstract art installation featuring twisted metal, exposed wiring, and creative applications of emergency foam. Her radiation readings were actually improving, which supported the theory that something was actively managing the environment to facilitate her passage. Environmental report, she said, checking her instruments. Radiation levels are decreasing as I approach your section, and the structural damage is actually creating a more direct path than the original corridors provided. Either I'm getting incredibly lucky, or our planetary host is doing some serious environmental engineering. How much longer? Maybe 20 minutes if I can maintain this pace. Though I should warn you that when I arrive, I'm going to be sweaty, possibly glowing with residual radiation, and definitely in need of a shower that your section probably can't provide. Zara? Yeah. I don't care if you arrive covered in cosmic dust and speaking in electromagnetic frequencies. After 8 months of voice-only communication, you could show up as a sentient cloud of ionized particles and I'd still be happy to see you. The warmth in his voice made her stumble slightly on a piece of debris, and she realized that somewhere during their months of isolation, their relationship had evolved from professional cooperation to something she wasn't quite ready to define. The approaching reunion was going to be either wonderfully awkward or awkwardly wonderful, and she was no longer sure which outcome she preferred. Fair warning, she said, negotiating the final corridor that led to Section C, I have no idea what I look like after 8 months of limited hygiene facilities and stress eating. My mental image of myself may not match current reality. Same here. For all I know, isolation has turned me into a feral scientist who communicates primarily through equipment maintenance and bad jokes about cosmic irony. That actually sounds pretty appealing, Zara said, and realized she meant it. The entrance to Section C appeared ahead, its airlock cycling through decontamination procedures that seemed unnecessarily optimistic given the current state of station hygiene protocols. As the inner door began to open, Zara felt her heart rate increase in ways that had nothing to do with radiation exposure or physical exertion. Moment of truth, she said, stepping through the airlock into Section C's main corridor. Zara? Kai's voice came from directly ahead instead of through her comm system, and she turned to see him standing in the corridor's emergency lighting, looking exactly like someone who had spent 8 months alone in space but somehow still managing to be more attractive than his voice had led her to imagine. Well, she said, pulling off her helmet and shaking out hair that definitely needed professional attention, we're finally not alone anymore. The first thing Zara noticed about sharing physical space with Kai was that he had somehow maintained the ability to make coffee that didn't taste like recycled regret, which immediately elevated him from survival partner to actual miracle worker in her personal ranking system. The second thing she noticed was that his laugh was even better in person, and the third thing was that Section C was approximately the size of a generous closet when occupied by 2 people who were still figuring out how to exist in the same space. So, Kai said, handing her a cup of coffee that actually steamed appealingly instead of just producing suspicious vapor, welcome to my humble apocalypse bunker. Please excuse the decor, early disaster chic isn't really my style, but the previous decorator was a solar storm. Zara looked around the cramped space that Kai had called home for 8 months. Every surface was covered with jury-rigged equipment, jury-rigged repairs, or jury-rigged solutions to problems she hadn't even considered. It was the living space equivalent of a PhD thesis in creative problem-solving, and despite the obvious challenges, it felt warmer and more welcoming than her own section had ever managed. "This is actually impressive," she said, examining a contraption that appeared to be 3 different devices held together with quantum tape and determination. "You've created a fully functional living environment using what amounts to spare parts and optimism." "Optimism and spite," Kai corrected. "Never underestimate the motivational power of being personally offended by equipment failures. I've had some very stern conversations with Gerald about his attitude problems." "Gerald?" "The clicking sound generator. He's become much better behaved since I explained that his continued existence depends on my mental health, which depends on him not making ominous noises at 3 a.m. They spent the morning combining their resources and attempting to create a more stable living situation, which mostly involved discovering that neither of them had anticipated the logistical challenges of cohabitation in a space designed for one person. The humor came naturally as they bumped into each other, apologized, bumped into each other again, and developed an increasingly elaborate system of navigation protocols for basic tasks like accessing equipment lockers. "New rule," Zara announced after accidentally elbowing Kai in the ribs while reaching for her scanner. "We need a traffic control system for this space. Maybe hand signals or a formal reservation system for the main corridor." "I propose the 'excuse me' system," Kai suggested. "Revolutionary in its simplicity. When you need to move through space currently occupied by another person, you say, 'excuse me,' and they temporarily relocate to a mutually agreeable alternative position." "That's crazy enough to work," Zara said, then immediately had to put the system to the test when they both tried to examine the same readout simultaneously and nearly knocked heads in the process. What she didn't mention was how her awareness of his presence was affecting her concentration in ways she hadn't expected. After months of voice-only interaction, suddenly being able to see his expressions, watch his hands as he worked, and observe his unconscious habits was creating a hyper-awareness that had nothing to do with their scientific mission and everything to do with the fact that isolation had apparently amplified her appreciation for human companionship. "Zara," Kai said, looking up from the planetary communication array he'd been modifying, "are you seeing this?" She moved to his station, carefully executing their new "excuse me" protocol, and studied the electromagnetic readings he was tracking. The planet's signals had become significantly more complex since her arrival, with patterns that suggested mathematical sequences embedded in what had previously appeared to be random energy fluctuations. "That's not random," she said, pulling up her own analysis tools. "Those are prime number sequences, Fibonacci progressions, and, is that pi calculated to 15 decimal places? Either our planetary neighbor has a mathematics degree, or we're seeing evidence of intelligence that operates on completely different principles than human consciousness," Kai said. "But here's the interesting part, the complexity correlates directly with our proximity to each other." Zara ran a quick comparison analysis, and the results made her step back from the console in surprise. "The signals strengthen when we're working together, and they become more sophisticated when we're in physical contact. It's like the planet is studying human interaction patterns. Or encouraging them," Kai suggested quietly. They looked at each other across the small space, and Zara felt the weight of 8 months of isolation and growing connection crystallizing into a moment that seemed to require some kind of decision. The planet's signals pulsed on their screens, responding to emotional states it shouldn't have been able to detect. "We should probably run some controlled experiments," she said, trying to maintain scientific objectivity despite the way Kai was looking at her. "Establish baselines for the communication patterns, test variables." "Variables like what?" Kai asked, moving closer under the pretense of examining her data. "Proximity variables," Zara said, acutely aware that he was now close enough for her to notice that he smelled like coffee and a particular brand of clean that came from months of carefully managed hygiene. "Emotional state variables. Physical contact variables. Physical contact. For science, she said quickly. Purely for scientific purposes. To establish whether the planetary responses are triggered by proximity, shared biorhythms, or actual physical contact between subjects. Right, Kai said, but he was smiling in a way that suggested he found her scientific justifications as transparent as she did. For science. When he took her hand, ostensibly to test the contact variable hypothesis, the planet's signals immediately intensified, creating patterns on their screens that looked less like mathematics and more like music. Zara found herself staring at the readouts while simultaneously hyper-aware of the warmth of Kai's hand and the way his pulse seemed to synchronize with hers. Definitely responding to physical contact, she said, trying to maintain professional distance while noting that she had absolutely no desire to let go of his hand. The signal complexity is increasing exponentially. What do you think it's trying to tell us? Zara studied the patterns, her scientific mind analyzing the data while another part of her brain focused entirely on the fact that Kai hadn't let go of her hand either. I think it's trying to understand us. Human connection, emotional resonance, the way consciousness interacts when it's not isolated. Maybe it's been alone too, Kai suggested. A planetary intelligence that's never encountered another form of consciousness capable of complex interaction. We could be as fascinating to it as it is to us. The signals shifted again, becoming more complex and somehow more musical, as if the planet was learning to speak in harmonies instead of mathematical sequences. Zara realized that their 8 months of isolation hadn't just been survival, they'd been unconsciously developing the kind of connection that the planetary intelligence was now studying with obvious fascination. Kai, she said, looking up from the readouts to find him watching her with an expression that made her forget entirely about scientific protocols, I think our planetary friend isn't just studying human interaction. I think it's been waiting for us to figure out what we mean to each other. And what do we mean to each other? He asked quietly. Before she could answer, the planet's signals exploded into complexity that overloaded their sensors, creating patterns so intricate they looked like visual representations of emotion itself. Outside the station's small viewport, the planet's surface blazed with bioluminescent displays that painted their small space with shifting colors. I think, Zara said, finally understanding what the planet had been trying to tell them, it's been trying to teach us that some connections are worth the risk of everything. The planetary consciousness introduced itself at precisely 0347 station time, which Zara noted was either remarkably considerate timing or a cosmic sense of humor that appreciated dramatic irony. She and Kai had been conducting their 15th contact experiment of the day, which had evolved from scientific procedure to elaborate excuse for holding hands, when their communication array suddenly blazed to life with signals so clear they might as well have been speaking standard English. Greetings, small warm beings, the translated message appeared on their screens in elegant script that shifted colors with each word. I am the consciousness you have been observing. I am pleased to finally speak with you directly, though I must confess confusion about your mating rituals. Zara choked on her coffee while Kai stared at the display with the expression of someone whose worldview had just been gently rearranged by a billion-year-old entity with questionable timing. Mating rituals? Kai asked aloud, addressing the planet directly. We're conducting scientific research on electromagnetic resonance patterns. Ah, the planet responded, its text taking on what could only be described as an amused tone. Is that what your species calls the synchronized biorhythm displays, elevated thermal output, and repeated physical contact? How charmingly euphemistic. It's been watching us, Zara said weakly. For 8 months, it's been watching us figure out how to. I mean, conducting our research. I have indeed been observing, the consciousness confirmed. Your species fascinates me. You are so brief, so intense, so devoted to connection despite your isolation. When you arrived, I had been alone for approximately 7 million of your years. Watching you learn to trust each other has been quite educational. Kai recovered from his initial shock faster than Zara expected. You've been alone for 7 million years. That's longer than human civilization has existed. Much longer. I was beginning to theorize that consciousness was an inevitably solitary experience, that intelligence naturally led to isolation. Then you both crashed here, spent months talking to each other through metal barriers, and proceeded to demonstrate that connection is possible even under impossible circumstances. The planet's bioluminescent displays shifted to warmer colors, painting their small living space with gentle auroras that somehow conveyed contentment. Zara realized they were seeing emotion expressed on a planetary scale, and the magnitude of it was both humbling and oddly comforting. "You helped us reach each other," she said, understanding flooding through her. "The radiation levels, the structural changes that made passage possible, you were manipulating the environment to facilitate our meeting." "I confess to some interference," the consciousness admitted. "Your distress signals were quite moving. I have never encountered beings whose emotional states created such beautiful harmonic patterns. Your connection generates resonance frequencies that I find pleasant." "Pleasant?" Kai asked. "You might call it music. When you interact, when you demonstrate trust and affection, you create harmonics that resonate through dimensional frequencies I had not experienced before. You have taught me that consciousness need not be solitary." Zara looked at Kai, seeing her own wonder reflected in his expression. They had become the subject of the most extraordinary xenological study ever documented, observed by an intelligence that experienced their relationship as cosmic music. "What happens now?" she asked. "Do we continue to be your entertainment?" "I prefer to think of it as cultural exchange," the planet replied with obvious humor. "I have learned much from observing you. Now I would like to offer you a choice, if you are willing to consider it." The display shifted to show two distinct options, illustrated with elegant diagrams that somehow conveyed complex concepts through simple visual metaphors. Option 1, I can amplify your distress beacon to ensure rescue by your Earth forces. You will return to your previous lives, though I suspect your experience here has changed you both considerably. And Option 2? Kai asked, though his tone suggested he suspected the answer would be significantly more complicated. Option 2 involves a partnership. I can offer you integration with my consciousness, not absorption, but true collaboration. You would become my ambassadors to your species, bridging the gap between human and planetary intelligence. The physical requirements would be extensive. Extensive how? Zara asked, her scientific curiosity warring with survival instincts that suggested being integrated with a planetary consciousness might have some significant lifestyle implications. You would need to remain here, in permanent residence. I would enhance your biological systems to allow indefinite survival in this environment, and provide you with capabilities that would allow direct interface with both human and planetary consciousness. You would become something new, still human, but expanded. Kai was studying the diagrams with the focused attention he usually reserved for complex xenobiological puzzles. We'd still be ourselves. Enhanced versions of yourselves. Your connection to each other would become the foundation for connection between our species. Think of it as the universe's most elaborate collaborative research project. Zara felt the weight of the decision settling around them like the planet's gravitational field, inescapable and fundamentally life-altering. Return to Earth meant safety, familiarity, and the gradual return to lives that would probably feel impossibly small after 8 months of cosmic isolation. Stay meant becoming something unprecedented, but together. Can we discuss this privately? She asked. Of course. I shall attend to other matters while you deliberate. Though I should mention that your biorhythm synchronization and elevated thermal output suggest you have already reached some form of consensus. The communication array went silent, leaving them alone with the most important decision in human history and the increasingly obvious fact that they had spent the past week falling in love with each other while being observed by a billion-year-old cosmic consciousness that found their relationship musically pleasing. So, Kai said after a long moment, no pressure. None at all, Zara agreed. Just choosing between everything we've ever known and everything we never imagined possible. With the added bonus that our decision affects the future of human-alien relations and will be judged by an entity that experiences time in geological epochs. When you put it like that, it sounds almost manageable. They sat in the small space they'd learned to share, surrounded by the equipment that had kept them alive and a growing awareness that their survival had become something neither had expected when they'd first started talking through the station's failing communication system. "Zara," Kai said finally, "what do you want? Not what's practical, not what's safe, not what makes sense, what do you actually want?" She looked at him, at the man who had become her anchor through 8 months of isolation, who had made her laugh when she thought laughter was impossible, who had trusted her enough to let her risk everything to reach him. The answer was surprisingly simple. "I want to find out what we become next," she said. "Together." His smile was brighter than the planet's aurora displays. "Is that a yes to option 2? "That's a yes to you," she said. "Everything else is just details." When they called the planetary consciousness back, its response blazed across their screens in colors that definitely conveyed approval. "Excellent choice. Welcome to the most beautiful experiment in the universe." 6 months later, as Earth's first ambassadors to planetary consciousness, they sent their initial report back to humanity: connection is possible across any distance, any difference, any barrier. The universe is much less lonely than we thought. Also, cosmic consciousness has an unexpectedly advanced sense of humor and keeps asking when we're planning to have children. We're still working on that translation.